next speaker is Dr. Buckley T. Foster, author of How Great Was the Slaughter? Market Hunters, Sportsmen, and Wildlife Conservation in Arkansas. Dr. Foster is assistant professor of 19th century Southern and Arkansas history at the University of Central. There's a UCA connection on this program today for some reason. Maybe. Is there a conspiracy? Has Conway come to Little Rock? Maybe. He's a seventh generation Arkansasier. His latest monograph, So Great Was the Slaughter, Market Hunters, Sportsmen, and Wildlife Conservation in Arkansas, examines the decline of market hunting from the rise of the modern sportsman and the origins of wildlife conservation of Arkansas from 1800 to 1925. This book recently won the J.G. Ragsdale Award from the Arkansas Historical Association for the best book-length study of Arkansas history for the year. His subsequent research project focuses on the federal side of early wildlife conservation, the Migratory Bird Act and the Bird Law, and the conflict between non-resident sportsmen and market hunters at Big Lake in Arkansas, site of the famous Big Lake War. He has written for Arkansas Wildlife, Arkansas Democrat Gazette, the Arkansas Historical Quarterly, and Greenhead Magazine. And if you don't know what greenheads are, I'm sorry. You'll learn. He's appeared on the Bear Grease podcast, the Arkansas Game and Fish podcast, Arkansas Wildlife, and a segment of Arkansas Outdoors on KFSM TV in Fayetteville. Dr. Foster, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and do this just in case. That way you can get me. Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming out. Once upon a time, 100 years ago, if you looked at the Arkansas landscape, you would find no self-propagating numbers of deer, bear, turkey, alligator, beaver. Well, I guess it's easier to say, bear, we were down to 30 in the state. Deer, somewhere the numbers are a little bit sketchy, but somewhere around 2,000. And we have millions now. It's easier to say what actually was in the woods. And that's pretty much squirrel and rabbits. And the only reason we have squirrel is because they migrated. A lot of people don't know that squirrels migrate, but they actually migrated from Mississippi and swam the Mississippi River. The last time that happened was in the 1960s. So I start my talk at the end with 1925 because that's where my study ends. And it is not a happy story to 1925. It's actually a sad story. It's a cautionary tale. It is a story of waste, of over-harvesting, and a basic war between many different classes of people in Arkansas, many different backgrounds, attitudes, the way they see the wildlife itself and fish. So it is a sad story. The success and the happiness comes after my story. But I always start with the end to tell you that it's a failure by 1925. So some people ask me, how did I end up on this subject? How did I find to do research? Why did I fall in love with this subject? And so on and so forth. Well, I'm from Arkansas. I was born and raised in Boonville. And from very early childhood, I was in the woods, like many Arkansasiers are. And so that was always an interest, and I'm a historian, so they kind of cross each other. But what piqued my interest specifically about this is I read about 10 years ago, I read about a war. And it was a war that was not between two foreign armies. On on distant battlefields, that this war actually took place between two classes of people right here in Arkansas, in northeast Arkansas, around a lake known as Big Lake. So I want to start with that and tell you exactly what that war was about, to give you a little bit of background, because once I read that article, I thought, I want to write a book about Big Lake, the Big Lake Wars. And that war turned out to be between market hunters, and a market hunter is simply someone who kills for a living. They kill, harvest animals, whether it be early market hunters, of course. We think of frontiersmen who go out and they're catching beaver and killing buffalo and all that sort of stuff for their pelts, to later market hunters, which are mainly what I focus on during the time period actually when baseball's getting spoke about, when Brian was talking about prize fighting, post-Civil War, late 1800s into the 1900s, and the rise of the sportsman. The modern sportsman we think of as someone who basically hunts or fishes for fun, doesn't have to do it for a living. And they have a war. I'll tell you about it. So, first of all, I have to tell you about Big Lake. 1811, 1812, Arkansas experienced a series of earthquakes over in northeast Arkansas that now we refer to that region as the sunken land, because that region, when the earthquake happens, the land actually sinks. It happens in Arkansas and it happens in Tennessee. If you look over there on the side, that red area is that's the New Madrid seismic zones, what that means. And it drops the ground and it causes the lakes around, the rivers around those areas to form pretty good sized lakes. Now, Big Lake is at the time roughly 40,000 acres. And we think of lakes, we think of like Beaver Lake or bigger lakes that are like recreational lakes where you can go swim, fish, that sort of thing. But this lake averages about 3 feet deep. Sometimes it goes completely dry in the dry season. But if you look over there to the left, that's kind of like one of the early renditions of what Big Lake kind of looks like. It's very marshy area. And the thing is it's because of its location, it is on the flyway of the migratory birds, Mississippi Flyway. And so twice a year during the fall and during the spring, we have geese and we have ducks that land by the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, there on the lake. Also, it's full of fish, lots and lots of fish. And so very early, it attracts market hunters to go up there because of the abundance. But who are these market hunters? Market hunters are going to end up showing up after the Civil War, really start focusing in the 1880s, 1890s. As many as 100 market hunters are working Big Lake. Some are seasonal and some are year-round. So they live on Big Lake in houseboats and shacks and all that sort of thing. And what happens is in around 1900, a group of wealthy Tennesseans, actually, led by a guy named Joseph Acklin, will contact a timber company who owns Big Lake. They own tons and tons of land around Arkansas, and all they care about is the timber. And so these modern sportsmen now, he actually is also the game warden, the state game warden of Tennessee, wealthy, super wealthy guy, multimillionaire, starts this club. It's called the Big Lake Shooting Club, and it's exactly what it started as, like target practice. They would have competitions and throw things in the air and shoot and stuff like that. But anyway, they took it one step further, and where they were in Tennessee, a lot of the game was shot out by then. A lot of people had moved through, and a lot of the game had disappeared. And so they're looking for better hunting grounds, and so they discover on a hunting trip Big Lake. So they contact that timber company along with a couple of other smaller entities, and they arrange to purchase a 10-foot strip around Big Lake. And they claim Big Lake on what's called riparian rights, which means if a waterway is non-navigable all the way through, then you can say it's private and you can keep people off of it. You own the bottom of the lake. And so they pay $5 to the timber company, and they control nearly 40,000 acres of land. And they say to the market hunters, get out. So that's where the war begins. Now, one of the things they do is they start dumping in a lot of money. This is the first clubhouse that they build. End up putting in what would be today's money, somewhere around $3 million in improvements. This is just one of the buildings. They have boats and all kinds of things that go along with it. They hire people to tend to it. They hire pushers, who are basically people that when you get in a duck boat or pirogue or like a canoe-like thing, they have poles and they'll push you around. So they are basically shutting off Big Lake from the market hunters, who were making a living. So basically they said to those minimum 50 and as many as 100, you no longer have a way to make an income. And so the traditional way that they had lived for many years, and some of them had been doing it their entire lives, they had just moved to Big Lake later, all of a sudden traditional activities become illegal because you're trespassing. That's the first thing. They are breaking trespassing laws going on this. Well, they say it's a lake that should be open, and that's where the war begins. Up to and including they burn the clubhouse. There's a game warden that gets murdered. There's a whole lot to the story that I actually do not cover in this book. Because as I dug deeper, I realized that this is not happening in a vacuum. It's actually going on, and had gone on, a lot of different places. And I needed to write the book that I've written now before I could get into the Big Lake War. So, next question. Why did I choose this time period? Well, one of the reasons I chose this time period to look into, 1925, I've already given you the answer to that. It's because by 1925, conservation efforts had ended. It now turns to a propagation effort where you have to bring animals back in. The animals are pretty much gone, and fish are pretty much gone by 1925. And, of course, if you know anything about Arkansas history and Southern history, you know the Great Depression for Arkansas farmers had started really in 1920. And so the focus is economic issues and, again, trying to bring things back, and then follow the Great Depression with World War II. And so you really don't start earnest efforts to try to bring the animals back until really the post-1950s. So I entered it in 1925, and why I started in 1800 is because Louisiana Purchase is in 1803. That's when Arkansas becomes part of the United States in a roundabout way. And inadvertently, we already had a couple of books who mention early hunters in the colonial period for Arkansas. And they are Judge Arnold had written, he's a Arkansas colonial, and he's written a couple of books. And, of course, he's a retired federal judge, and he wrote about the law. That's what his focus was, about the law. And the thing is that he didn't specifically mean to cover hunters, but the only people that were in Arkansas during the colonial period were primarily hunters. So he covers them. I didn't need to recover it. And so that's why I started when I did in 1800. Also another reason, and that's why you see the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission symbol there, they're created in 1915, and it gives us a decade to see what they've done. So that's another reason why I ended in 1925. Okay, so let's go overall. So that's the background. Let's go overall and talk about markets. Why are there markets for wild game? Why does it exist? What are the markets? Market hunting era, as you can see, 1858 to 1896. It is because during that time period we have the Industrial Revolution, which leads to more immigration. Cities are growing. We're getting more and more removed from the countryside. There are massive population growths. And people need the wild game, and this time they're after meat because the fur is gone out of Arkansas. It's already been caught up by then. So this is what I call the modern market hunter, who basically is meat hunting. And people want to use wild game to supplement. Immigrants can purchase it relatively cheaply, and also those who are wealthy like to put on entire game dinners. Example over here on the left-hand side, that's from the Drake Hotel, and it gives you one of their game menus. I don't know if you can see it very well, but up there's venison and game broth and trout and black bass and mountain sheep and ham of a bear and buffalo tongue and mountain sheep and goose and quail, and I mean this is just one setting for all this. Can you imagine there's prairie chickens down there. That was another thing. By the time we get to 1925, prairie chickens are extinct in Arkansas, just like the passenger pigeon. It's all gone. They're all gone. So over there on the other side, the remnant of wild game, basically if you looked and saw what's pouring out, so that barrel represents all the wildlife that exists in the world. And it says stop all or lose all, and so it's showing you illegal slaughter of game, and too long open seasons, and legal slaughter and sale of game, and all those sorts of things are going on nationally, and there's conservationists and those who are preservationists even, who are trying to stop the sale of wild game before it's all gone. And it's just not just Arkansas. The thing with Arkansas is we're late to the game because we have game and fish much longer than our neighbors do. And I'm going to tell you why that is. But that's the markets that are wanting to be fulfilled, and there's money to be made. These guys can make more in a couple months by shooting for the market than someone farming, a regular Arkansas farmer, can make in a year. And you only have to work a couple months. So who's doing the slaughtering? Well, this would have been propaganda. As you can see, 1912. Up there on the left-hand corner, it says market hunters. But also, around the same time, we have pump, and it says automatic, but it's semi-automatic shotguns that are created during that time period. We have the sportsmen that get the skull and crossbones as well. And then over there, aliens, which is part of the racial anti-immigrant movement. We kill all songbirds because in Europe, I mean, everybody knows the blackbird pies, and we've heard the nursery rhymes and things like that. Anyway, they kill everything they can eat. So songbirds are not excluded from that. Anyway, these are, and of course, there's all the hunting dogs in the beginning and the front and things like that. You could not tell when the sportsmen, what we call a modern sportsman, when they first exist, when they begin to come around, what we think of, like I said, as a modern sportsman, you couldn't really tell the difference between a modern sportsman and a market hunter by, like, the game. So I'll give you an example. As you can imagine, when sporting is growing, sports magazines are born. So the great-great-great-grandpappy of like Field and Stream, Outdoor Life, all those sort of things are appearing. Anyway, one of the biggest kind of headquarters is Memphis. And we have a reporter that comes to Big Lake, and he comes down, I'm going to do a report on market hunting and sportsmen and that sort of thing. And so he tells his pusher, he says, push me to the part of the lake where I can see a sportsman, where the sports hunt. And so he says, no problem. Goes over, he observes. He says, okay, take me now to the market hunter's location. And so he does, takes him to a different part of the lake, sees where the market hunters come back. So he's writing the article, and he says, the only difference that I can tell between a market hunter and a sportsman is the sportsman shoots at anything that flies. And they kill anything. And they miss. And the market hunter picks the particular bird that he wants and never misses. But the piles of the ducks were the same size. And so early sportsmen, if you wanted to be considered a great sportsman, it was how many you killed. If you're a market hunter, you're killing it for a living. So when they first clash, it is not because they have different philosophical ideas. They're both killing. They're competing against each other. Later on, here's the difference and here's the big change when things begin to be a real war, not only at Big Lake, but all across Arkansas and all across the South and all across the nation. As the animals begin to disappear, the sportsman and the market hunter take different approaches. The market hunter says, I have to kill as much as I can because my livelihood's going away. So they just turn it on and kill as much as they can. They shoot them in the spring, they shoot them at night, they shoot them in the day, they shoot them all year round. On the spring, when they're going up to have babies, to when in the south or in the fall when they're going south, just in migration. Now, the other attitude is from the sportsman. And the first thing the sportsmen do is realize if we don't make a change, we're not going to have the animals to continue to shoot or pursue. And my kids aren't, my grandkids aren't. We have a legacy to protect. And so the very first thing they do, which is a very rudimentary form of conservation, but the very first thing they do is they self-regulate. Now, we think it's funny now because if you know anything about duck hunting specifically, the limit is 6 a day. Well, you go from no limit to where the sportsmen say, we're going to limit 50 a day. So like I said, it seems ridiculous, but 50 is a huge self-regulation from unlimited. So that's kind of the beginning. Well, what happens overall in the longer story, 125-year story, is that the closer we get to 1925, the sportsmen begin to take on a very conservation-minded attitude to where they begin to push for more game laws overall. Now, why, before I get too far down that trail, why does Arkansas hold game longer than everybody else does, our neighbors? Whether it be Mississippi, Tennessee, Missouri, even Louisiana, the sportsman's paradise. Certainly, Indian Territory is going to be really right in there close with us, Texas, and so on and so forth. Well, you probably already know this if you think about it. We are primitive for a long period of time. You take a look over there on the left, that's Interstate 40 before we got it paved. No, maybe not, just a joke. Anyway, but this would have been an improved road. See, it has ditches. That is a main thoroughfare, but see what it turns into when it gets wet. Those guys over there on the right, they're building a road through the mountains. And you can see their equipment. It's like a wagon, some pickaxes, and some mules. So transportation, if you wanted to get to Arkansas, you really had to want to be here. And so those who came in didn't stay long. And then, some of the deepest spots, if you look at a 1820 map of Arkansas on the right-hand side, it says, the Great Swamp. That's a barrier. Who wants to go through the Great Swamp, right? So you're pretty much having to come in through the Southwest Trail, which is starting up in Missouri to come down. Very difficult to get here. And so that is a hindrance for us overall. Economically, we don't develop. We're behind everybody else. But it is a great thing for animals, our wildlife, and our fish population. The bad thing is that the secret gets out, and then it starts showing up in all those magazines. And then it becomes almost legendary to come to Arkansas. The last of the frontier to go kill. And so non-residents flock to us. And it is what we would call sportsmen. So this is just one example. That's one of the forests and streams from 1902. That says the Ozark Clubhouse. And that says Governor McMillan over there. And the game hanging and so on and so forth. It's not, of course, as fancy as the Big Lake Shooting Club, but Governor McMillan is governor of Tennessee. And to go back to baseball, there are a ton of people from St. Louis who are members of clubs in Arkansas. And not just St. Louis, but also many other Chicago. Kaminsky is somebody who comes down and hunts in Arkansas. brings their players down. You've probably seen, if you looked at anything about Babe Ruth, a lot of times you'll see a picture of him with a quail gun and hunting garb on. Lots of Ted Williams and so on and so forth. A lot of them come, and the place that they come in many cases is Arkansas, because we're the last holders of this of all this game. Now, as I mentioned before, meat market hunters are the ones who are coming in. We've got a guy who is in Chicago. He is considered the meat king because Chicago becomes the slaughterhouse of the nation, right? We're sending cattle out of Texas and other locations and pigs and everything to Chicago, and Chicago becomes this great slaughterhouse of the nation. Well, this guy decides he wants to put basically a wild game processing part in as part of his big slaughterhouses. And so he hires 100 market hunters, and every fall, they get on a train, and they start at the Canadian border, and they follow the waterfowl migration all the way down and shoot. And every few days, they have a train that comes down, picks up the carloads of dead animals, brings them ammunition and pay, and carries it back up to Chicago, and they just follow it all the way down to Louisiana. And then in the spring, they do the same thing. All they do is shoot and kill. To give an example, at Big Lake, again, because that's the numbers I've been looking at closest, there are some days that 90,000 ducks are shipped out in one day. One day. So you can imagine what kind of damage that's doing overall to the population. That's migratory birds. They're not here all the time. Those are going up and down. That's why we end up later on having the migratory bird law. So what you see right here, that's a two-man shoot in one day. This is not like a week's worth. This is a two-man shoot in one day. A lot of times those are canvasbacks. Talking about greenheads. Greenheads are mallards. Canvasbacks are the most highly prized. You could get almost $2 for a pair of canvasbacks, while other ducks were like 50 cents. Well, $2 is a fortune back then. Why canvasbacks? Canvasbacks are one of those animals that they eat wild celery, and their meat takes on the taste of wild celery, so it's already seasoned. So it's very highly prized by the fanciest restaurants. You always see it on the menu, people buy it. So this is our modern sportsmen I was talking about that are coming in, and they begin to, and sportswomen. There's a few of those ladies as well that are parts of clubs and whatnot. I always put this picture in here. The guy that is right there, with he kind of has a little mustache there. That guy's name is James Beckhart, and he has an interesting story in that he starts out as a market hunter, and then as that dies and more laws come online, he becomes a guide. And he is known as the father of the Arkansas-style duck call. And about, I don't remember, 7, 8, 9 years ago, he charged $5 for a sport to stay the night with him. $5 to take him hunting. And of course, that included food. His wife would cook him food. And then he thought he wanted to supplement his income, so he started carving duck calls. And he charged $5. So he got 5, 5, and 5. A little souvenir, right? One of his duck calls, one of the more elaborate duck calls, about, like I said, 7, 8 years ago, sold for $95,000. Because he's the father. But he changed his ways. And later on, actually, his son-in-law, a guy named Lev Bryan, he becomes, after Big Lake becomes a wildlife preserve, he becomes a game warden there, and he was a market hunter as well, and really does a great career with it, as a matter of fact. Anyway, so we transition this over. So as I mentioned, the fight between that, the attitude of now the new sportsman and then the new market hunter, there's nothing more destructive to wild game of any kind than hunting, netting, trapping, or snaring for market. We might as well offer bounties for the destruction of our wild game as to allow it to be sold on the market. So really that is the first focus of the sportsmen and legislators who are like-minded, is to attack the market hunters, whether they be local market hunters or whether they be out-of-state market hunters. They're an easy target. Later on, out-of-staters will become the target of Arkansasers because they think, hey, you're coming in here and killing our game and then taking it back to Missouri or wherever you're going because they're taking it home, to their friends. But there's a lot of different fights that go on like that. Now, simultaneously, and I think the thing that probably kills more animals than anything else and causes more destruction than anything else, and it's an ongoing problem even today, is that simultaneously we're wanting to put more acres into farm production. And so from 1850 to 1910, just in Arkansas, 7 million acres of wildlife ground is turned into plowed fields. The expansion, 7 million acres in 60 years, basically. So that has a huge impact on animal destruction. And so we've got shooters killing with no abandon, and we've got destruction of habitat at the same time, which is a very bad thing. Another thing that happens is, let me go back to this, that road building. The guys over there who are building roads, every shack within, every couple of miles, every shack, you could go in, a wooden shack on the side of the road when they're doing construction. What's inside of those shacks? Dynamite. So if you want to go fishing, you go knock in a shack door, you grab some dynamite, you go in, you're going fishing. So actually fish are the first to get destroyed. They're reintroducing fish into Arkansas very early, even before our game is gone. Game is gone. Okay, so like I said, the target of Arkansas anger, non-residents, and then it doesn't take long before market hunters and non-residents and non-resident market hunters or anything together, they're all seen as the enemy. And we actually have our very first game law that's passed. In 1875, we're the first in the nation to pass a non-resident barring people from coming. But nobody's enforcing it. So kind of like enforcement with prize fighting. The main way to enforce laws during that time period, there's no game warden. So unless it's a privately hired game warden over your own ground. But if it's state, the only people that enforce laws are sheriff office. Well, they're worried about who stole Mrs. O'Leary's cow, not, who shot 4 deer, because that's just what everybody was doing. So it's never really enforced at all. Now, this is not going, as I mentioned, this is not going on inside of a vacuum. There's a national movement, part of the progressive movement that Brian talked about earlier, about trying to clean up alcohol, poverty, push for women's rights, so on and so forth, progressive. And so a national movement, we've got Roosevelt and Leopold over there to the left, John Muir and Roosevelt together, preservationists, conservationists. Nobody came on a national level to push for conservation in Arkansas. It was a grassroots operation put forth by Arkansas sportsmen. But we do get some assistance from government officials, both federal, state, but also a very unique individual. Going to go back to one of the last slides that Yeager used. But before I get there, Futrell, governor, senator. Vizard was the very first state game warden who was not hired by the state, but was hired by a sportsmen's association. They took up collection, and he had no power at all. All he could do was gather information of wildlife crimes and hand them to the sheriff. That was his job. But he was the first state game warden. The guy, lawyer over there, happens to be a lawyer for the Biological Survey. He later becomes director. But he's involved trying to help pass legislation from afar. If you look at those big, that's called a punt gun. You can see the size of a regular shotgun in his left hand, and that's a punt gun that they would put on front of a skiff. And so it basically was a mini cannon, so you could kill a whole lot of ducks at one time. I've only run across one example of that for Arkansas. Most of the time that's used in the East Coast on those sand flats and things like that. But There were lots of punt guns around. I know they used them in Louisiana as well. But coming back to one of the last slides is McElhenney. Anybody heard of McElhenney as the last name? Familiar with McElhenney? What's he known for?
Hot sauce.
That's right, Tabasco. That's the McElhenney family. Well, McElhenney was a huge bird enthusiast. And he actually turned Avery Island, where Tabasco's made, into a bird refuge. And he talked 3 or 4 of his good friends who were like railroad widows and other philanthropists. His concept was to purchase land from the Canadian border along the Mississippi Flyway and give it to the states to protect and have basically a rest area for birds as they made their migration. Because it's not just regular waterfowl ducks. Songbirds, all sorts of shorebirds, all kinds of different birds do that. And so he wants to have that. So interestingly enough, he's very good friends with Vizard. They become friends. Have a complete chapter in the book called The Prince and the Pauper, where Vizard's basically selling his furniture to try to fund more educational efforts and trying to save birds. And, of course, McElhenney's mega wealthy. Anyway, they offer, McElhenney says to Vizard, if you can get your state to pass meaningful game laws, we will buy up to $100,000 worth of land and give it to the state of Arkansas. But we want to make sure there are laws there to protect the birds that are going to use that land. And so Vizard says, no matter what, I'll try. And so he tries for 5 years, and he can't get it done. The Arkansas government will not pass laws to protect those birds, even with a $100,000 offer. And so McElhenney and his buddies buy it on the other side of the Mississippi. And if you go through the Mississippi Delta side, all that land that is wildlife refuges and all that sort of stuff, he gave it to them. He gave it to the state of Mississippi, all that land through there, all through the Delta. And he does it other places too. Now, these are sportsmen or involved in federal government. These are people who are sports-like minded. They go out and hunt for fun, things like that. But there's also people that are what we would think of as conservationists or preservationists. And that is they would join up, like what later becomes the Audubon. We don't have the Audubon before 1925. We don't have the Isaac Walton League before 1925. If you're not familiar with Isaac Walton, it's a fishing organization, conservation organization. We don't have the Game and Fish Commission until 1915. But there are a lot of people, like a lady named Louise Stevenson is a federal court judge wife in Helena, and she's one of those women who are part of women's committees on committees for the state, and she starts an organization to educate children about protection of songbirds. And so it's people like that also join with the sportsmen who don't necessarily agree with the killing part, but they agree with the conservation, and they all get together and push and lobby as much as they can for more general game bill. So we finally get one. 1915, we get what's called a general game bill, and the reason it's different, there were laws that were on the books prior to 1915, but they were county-wide. And if anything was passed, any county could be exempt from the law. So this is the very first law that they finally passed, and that's why Futrell gets the credit because he introduced it. But it had been recycled 3 times already, and actually a sporting organization had actually written the bill and gave it to him to put into effect, which evidently happened all the time. Anyway, it gets passed, and it goes into effect and creates the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission in 1915. So we have 8 game wardens for the entire state, no budget, and a general game bill that puts into effect laws and things like that. Anyway, and then they try for the next 10 years to kill the Game and Fish Commission, up to and including taking all the authority away from any warden so they can't even arrest anybody. But that's a different story for a different book. So I've come to my favorite part when I'm sitting in the audience of every talk that I've ever been to. In conclusion, I always try to end all these talks with kind of the same idea. If you look on social media or maybe you're may or may not be involved in the sporting world or fishing world and things like that. The Arkansas Game and Fish gets a lot of flack. There are a lot of people that are unhappy with the Game and Fish Commission for whatever reason. But I always say that if it wasn't for the early efforts of the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission, we would not have any deer or turkey or bear or elk or any of the things that I mentioned that I said don't exist anymore. They brought all that back in. 1970s, they brought turkey. They were bringing in deer in the 40s and the 50s. When I was a kid in the 80s, they were bringing in bear. They brought in bear 3 or 4 different times. And by the 90s, there were so many bear that we actually were able to have a bear season that hadn't existed for over 50 years, almost 60 years. So that part, they really have done an incredible job. And they're up against things like that's over there on the right. That is a local game market. So you can see that this guy in Mena he's showing his wares. So he's showing the bear and the turkey and the quail, but also that's beside beef and pork and chickens and all kinds of things like that. So he's truly a meat market there. So I'll stop there. Now, I will, if anybody wants, you may want to be done and whatever, but I'll answer any questions. Most of the time when I do any kind of talks, people have questions, but I won't be hurt if you don't. Yes?
How did market hunters preserve their meat?
One of the things they do is, surprisingly enough, and I'm going to give you an example on Big Lake again, there was a small boat, a gasoline-powered boat, and it delivered ice to ice boxes on the ground. And so when you hunted a particular location, you'd go take your game, put it in that ice box, and wrap it up and put your name on it. And when you came back through, the guy who was carrying it to market would have dropped you some money off and picked up your stuff and refilled the ice bucket. So ice is something that we don't think of because it's so long ago, but that was one way. Another way is you put them in and you throw salt. And so that was the most common for a very long period of time. They'd pull everything and then basically skin them, leave a head on and feet on, and then put them in salt barrels. And those big giant barrels, wooden barrels, and then they would take them to the train station if the train finally got into where they were. If you didn't, you loaded them on wagons and took them to a train. So they'd be salted or they would be iced, one or the other. The ones that were on the train had an ice car. The one that I was mentioning with the 100 shooters, they had an ice car. So it'd come down, load it up, and carry it back to Chicago. Most of the time, they were putting them in the big barrels. And, of course, a lot of times it was illegal. It kind of varied. Sometimes it'd be illegal. Sometimes it wouldn't be illegal. And so they sometimes would put fish on top because you could sell fish, but you couldn't sell. So they just pile fish on top. So when you open it up, who wants to go fishing through a bunch of stinky fish? So, and interestingly enough, when everything kind of got illegal and prohibition went into effect, whiskey runners and market hunters used the same truck. They would haul both. You double your money, and run the same routes. They'd be all underground. So,
how well is our elk season going?
Today, well, you have to draw.
Right.
But there's enough to where you can harvest elk now, but you have to put in for a draw. And that's been going on, I guess, for 6, 7, 8 years now. Where I live in Clarksville, I'm only, about 45 minutes from Buckley Valley, so we see the elk all the time. But yes, it's still, and that's a way late introduction thing. One of the things I always thought was interesting about, like Harrison, I don't know if any of y'all ever went to Dog Patch, but I lived at Dog Patch for a long time. And one of the things that I thought was so cool that I was not able to do because it cost so much money, it was trout fish, right? Because you could go out and throw a piece of corn. And I had friends that, their parents gave them money. We didn't have any money, so I just had to watch. Anyway, trout and cotter. We got cotter up there. It's trout capital of the world, all this sort of stuff. Trout is not indigenous to Arkansas. It is a tourist trout brought specifically by a Harrison businessman to bring tourists to the country, to our area. And so that's something that certainly was not here in Arkansas. It's a modern invention. And Arkansas is not alone with that. In many places in the South, and trying to bring in more tourists or reintroduce animals to the countryside, would come up with different things. Vizard, our first game warden, did his best to get pheasants introduced into Arkansas. Did everything he could to get pheasants here, because at the time the scientific attitude toward pheasants is they were one of the only birds that could eat the boll weevil, which was, the bane of the cotton. It was killing, costing all kinds of money. And now we're going to get these birds. So get the farmers behind the protection of the animals, and we'll get these pheasants in. And he actually goes and buys 1,000 eggs from somewhere up north and brings them in and gives them away, but only to a very specific demographic. He puts a newspaper article and he says, I will give up to 10 pheasant eggs to only women. And you're like, what? What's the deal with that? Because women are nurturing. And so they're the only ones fit to actually be able to take care of baby pheasants. So if that doesn't tell you, sexist attitude of the time, it's nothing will.
Speaking of the elk, you have to draw, but is the elk hunts on public lands, and where do they get their elk? Because I know there is a couple elk farms.
That's where you have to get them. That was the deal. You bringing them in just like the deer, just like the fish, just like turkey. There are propagation farms that grow those, and then you bring them in, and that's basically what it is. We got our bear from Minnesota, Canada, and I can't remember the other place. But I had some people come in from a Game and Fish to talk to my class about conservation. I have a conservation class, and he said that DNA, you can tell even today if you harvest a bear, those 3 distinct DNA chains that they got them through those 2 different times are still existing in Arkansas.
I just wondered because up there where I grew up, actually, a mile from where I live, I don't know if it's still there, but got bought a bunch of property and was raising elk.
Right.
And that's why I was asking.
It's a good possibility.
I didn't know if he supplied the state with some.
Not because we reintroduced that to 25 years ago, so it had to be existing 20. It might have been, and he may have specifically set that up to particular bring those elk in and make the money off of them. I don't know.
They had quite a few elk. I remember seeing them from.
I know that there was a great deal of regulation around owning of wild animals, and so you have to get all kinds of permits and things like that, and that started very early as well.
Well, this would have been around 25 or so years ago.
There's a good possibility that they were connected. I don't honestly know where the elk came from.
White Oak Mountain, or if that's what they call it, White Oak Mountain, that's where I was raised.
Sure.
But I was just wondering if maybe, a specific few guys got permits, whatever, to raise them, because that seemed like that'd be a easier way if you had them here in the state to get them back out in the wild rather than trying to import all of them.
Yeah, just logistics alone would be a pain. I don't know whether they call the elk that currently are there have enough the numbers are large enough for self-propagation or not. I don't know if they're still introducing them or not. I don't think they are. And that's why it's so limited on the permits are so limited on what you can do. Yeah, I knew that I think I saw like 3 pictures this year where they had actually harvested bull elk.
But I remember going through there years ago, and I remember seeing at least 20 or so.
I don't even know what the elk population is now. I always say, hey, my world ends in 1925. Yeah.
Something that occurs to me, you're talking about trout having brought in. As somebody who spent many years up in the Rockies, we're rather proud of the difficulty of our trout fishing. I tell my friends up there about the trout fishing in Little Red here, and they can't believe it. It's heresy, suggesting that anything could challenge Rocky Mountain fishing. No, that's where you go to look good casting with a fly rod. But I very much love the picture of the former market hunter turned game warden and maker of duck calls. That reminds me of one of Nash Buckingham's best one-liners. What was it? A duck call in the hands of an inexperienced hunter is one of conservation's greatest assets.
Yeah, pretty much. Speaking of that, so Nash Buckingham. Some of you probably have never heard of Nash Buckingham. But if you're in the duck hunting world, you know Nash Buckingham is one of the most famous duck hunters in history. From as far as Arkansas duck hunting goes, you think this guy is his shotgun is in the museum in Memphis at the DU Museum on top of the pyramid. He's written several books, and I mean he's like the legend, right? The guy's not from Arkansas. He's from Memphis. And his father became part of a club in Arkansas called Beaver Dam Club. So going back to the market hunters versus the sportsmen, he would have been on the side of the non-resident sportsmen that many Arkansasians came to hate. And he is this, Arkansas legend, but he's not from Arkansas. So, and never lived here. Never lived here. It's all non-residents coming in and taking advantage. So, let's see somebody over here with a question. Sure.
Question. I think you said early on that by 1925, that list of animals that
Sure.
were small.
Right.
Did you not include alligators in there?
Alligators were included.
The question is, have we reintroduced alligators?
Many years ago.
And so now is the population stable?
Oh, yeah, it's been stable for a long time. I mean, we have alligator season. We have alligator season now. They somewhere on somebody's farm or something, they killed a whopper this year. 7-footer, 8-footer, I think. I can't remember how. 7.5 feet. They showed it, and they had a front end loader, picked it up. It was a monster. But, yes, they have been around. They've been self-propagating for quite a long period of time, actually. So, I've got more research, of course, to do, but I ran across a guy who owns one of the scrapbooks from one of the early Arkansas Game and Fish secretaries, and talking about deer and whatnot. The East Arkansas would flood. And so it would drive those deer up on dry ground, and then the market hunters would come in and kill 40, 50, 60 deer in one whack. Well, that was the very first thing they would tried to do when the Game and Fish is created, because the Mississippi flooded like clockwork every year. They would send groups over there. They'd take all 8 game wardens and any volunteers they could get and go over there and try to stop the slaughter of what few deer we had left. And the reason, just thinking about this in my head, in the scrapbook there was a sign that had been printed up by the Game and Fish, and you can imagine what kind of outrage it would start today. But it was posted all down there during flood season, and it said, you must tie up all dogs. If the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission warden sees a dog that is not tied, he will shoot it on sight. So because those dogs are running those deer, helping run them up on that high ground and that sort of stuff. So they just said we'll kill them on sight.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who use dogs here in Jersey. I don't necessarily like to use dogs because I have been out in the woods and actually seen a young deer. It was just run to death, and the dogs were, I didn't shoot the dog or the deer, but that deer just had it, and it was down on
Sure.
its knees, and the dog was fixing to be right on top of it, and it killed it, and there wasn't nobody around. So who's gonna get the deer,
Right.
But that's some of them big dogs.
Yeah.
Walkers.
Yeah, some of them big walker dogs. Well, they've been, I know across the state, different places have pretty much outlawed deer hunting with dogs all over the place. So that's all
Beagles
going.
can't catch up to the deer.
Yeah, well, that's why they use radio collars now. So, anyway. Anything else? All right. Thank y'all for your time.